Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome. Welcome to Authentic Self-Care for Stage Managers. This is a workshop hosted by Year of the Stage Manager and the Stage Managers Association. I'm so glad we are all here together. We have 410 registered for this webinar, and they're all around the world. This is a very special moment, and maybe none too soon for us to have this conversation. My name is Justin Scribner, and tonight my dear friend Gracie and I will be discussing two things that are not paired often enough, and that is stage managing and self-care. I thought it'd be really amazing to face this together as a community with someone who really knows what she's talking about. To promote this webinar, I wrote this description, which I want to read to you now. As stage managers, we tend to put everyone else's needs before our own, and whatever healthy routines we create usually go out the window as soon as we switch from one phase of production to the next. In a constantly changing career that can be very demanding, how do we find a relationship with self-care that works so that we can show up as our best selves at the theater and in our personal lives? And what exactly is authentic self-care? Well, we may not be able to find all of those answers together in only 1 hour, but we can start. And for those of you who are joining us and are not stage managers, I know you're also going to get a lot out of the ideas that we'll be discussing. So anyway, during tonight's interactive workshop, your videos and microphones will stay off, but Gracie and I will be asking you to share your thoughts and ideas with the group as we go in the chat. There will be some prompts as we go. During the last 10 minutes or so, we hope to answer questions from you. So you can also please drop those questions specifically in the Q&A section at the bottom, and we'll get to as many as we can. Thank you for being here. I'm really grateful that we have this time together. And I thought maybe we should just take a moment and center ourselves, relax our shoulders, loosen and elongate our necks, feel the seat beneath us. And just take a brief moment together and take a deep breath in and out. That's the way to start. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from Manhattan, which is an ancestral homeland of the Lenape nations, past and present, and I honor with gratitude the land and the people who've stewarded it throughout the generations. We chose to start with our introductions with land acknowledgements because we are committed to the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, which have left Indigenous people underserved and underrepresented. I've been a professional stage manager here in Manhattan for 19 years, mainly working on and off Broadway, and I love stage managing. It is my passion. I love working on plays and musicals, revivals, new work, stage readings, corporate events, award shows, New York City Marathon, the World Chess Championship, Skittles, the Broadway musical, you name it, I love it. But I am more than a stage manager. I'm also a producer, a teacher, a poet, a playwright, a knitter, a new author. My first collection of poems and short stories was published in October, and it is a understatement to say that the pandemic has shifted some major things in my life. But things actually have been shifting for a while for me underneath the surface. 6 years ago, I took a course on Ayurvedic self-care from Gracie, and it really opened my eyes to the power of vulnerability and the relationship between food and digestion and sleep, and how that relates to my mental and physical health, and just the importance of self-care. Gracie has been my friend since 1995, and actually, Rachel, if you would throw up those pictures of us, Gracie and I have stayed friends through many phases of our lives. Look at us, come on, those cuties. And we don't have pictures from when we first met, which was in 1995, but we've stayed friends forever, and she's always been a really important part of my life, and we've had a really deep, beautiful, meaningful spiritual connection. Gracie's actually the first person that I came out to. Over the years, Gracie's continued to surprise me with her expertise in the human condition and fostering community and facilitating healing everywhere she goes. Yoga teacher, retreat leader, Ayurveda scholar, mother. And Gracie now is a highly sought after self-care coach and the author of a new book, Self-Carefully. Right. So last month, I invited Gracie to guest lecture to the stage managers that I teach. And while we planned out our class together, this light bulb went off for me. And I realized like this work needs to be shared. How can I share this work? And how can I share Gracie with all of the stage managers I know? I mean, the entire SM community absolutely needs quality self-care. I mean, think of the stress we deal with. The stage managers are always handling high stakes and lots of pressure, a steady flow of urgency, and then these seemingly endless lists of responsibilities and duties. Think of our uphill struggle with time, maintaining long hours, taking our work home with us, managing routines that are always changing with very little time for ourselves. And then just think of the people also, like we're navigating large companies, difficult relationships, every type of personality, and we are the fulcrum of all communication to every single person in the theater. Because we set that tone and help to create the culture, it's really vitally important that we model and become leaders in self-care. So this very large audience that we have tonight, I think indicates a little bit of the enthusiasm we're seeing for this topic. And I think it also speaks to the need to do this work together right now. It's a very important time in our development as an industry and as a nation and, well, a globe. It's offered us this chance to step back from our work and engage in deep conversations and research and reflection, all while the entire theater industry is rethinking its systems and its practices and its ethos. We're seeing the social justice movement unfold all around us, and with the incredible work that our allies and activists are doing with Black Lives Matter and We See White American Theater, exposing our one-sided white supremacist culture and the oppressive systems and hierarchies that we've been suffering from and perpetuating. And to that end, I'm really inspired by Lisa and Narda's new book, Stage Management Theory as a Guide to Practice, and their incredible article about anti-racist stage management practices. And Rachel's going to drop that link in the chat. If you haven't read it, please bookmark and favorite that. Lisa Porta and Narda Alcorn are absolutely leading the thought that they're thought leaders in the stage management field, and I'm really excited to see what they have to say, and I look forward to hearing more from them. So all of this work that we're doing, and we're kind of immersed in all of this, is putting stage managers in a front-footed position where we're questioning how we show up and how we promote equity in all of the spaces that we inhabit, discovering what anti-oppression means for us individually and also as a community in terms of inclusion and disability and ableism. We're looking at privilege and power dynamics differently. We're rethinking the language that we use. We are increasing our threshold of discomfort. And we are expanding our capacity to hold space, which means with this vital, intense work that we're doing, our ideas about caring for ourselves also have to shift. So self-care is defined as taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. So to start, each one of us needs practical tools, education, and community, which we have. And I know just the woman to help us with them. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce my longtime friend and my self-care coach, Gracy Obuchowicz. Come on down, Gracie.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Justin. What a beautiful introduction to both the workshop and to our friendship and the work. of self-care. So thank you for inviting me into your community. And thank you so much to Year of the Stage Manager for having us here and spreading the word. I can't believe how many people are here. And thank you to all of you who are here live with us. I've been enjoying reading your chats and where you're from. And I'm just so impressed by the number of students that are here.
Yeah.
It actually makes me feel super inspired to be like the next generation coming up. Like, I think people are paying attention to what self-care is, and we're asking the right questions. So I'm holding space for us tonight to ask the right questions, to ask generative questions, to really dig into what is the self, what is care, and hopefully find a few tangible practices and perspectives that can shift the way that you take care of yourself and the people around you. So just a little bit about me. I'm also going to start with a land acknowledgement. So I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C. on land that is the homeland of the Piscataway and borders the territory of the Nacotchee people. I honor with gratitude the people who've stewarded this land for generations, and their presence is imbued in this land, our rivers, the islands, and the coastal plains. So I always like to start by telling you a little bit about myself. And that's because I think I need to have some authority to talk about self-care. And I don't speak from the authority of someone who has self-care all figured out. Rather, I am a person who has had a deep curiosity around what it means to care for themselves. And I've spent almost 40 years now really figuring that out. So I like to say that my best teacher of self-care was growing up in a family where people didn't practice a lot of self-care. There was a lot of addiction issues in my household, alcoholism, there was undiagnosed mental illness, and a lot of codependency. And codependency, which we'll get a little bit into in this workshop, it's the idea that if I can just control and manage everyone and everything around me, that somehow I can feel safe and be okay. So just to say that I didn't get a lot of modeling growing up of how to set really proactive boundaries and how to like stay true to myself and really trust what I was finding inside there. But rather, I just went out and tried to go into the world doing what I had learned, which was a lot around perfectionism, just pushing myself really hard. I had this idea that if I could just be perfect in everything I did, particularly around school and studying, that I would somehow like get to the place where I would feel good about myself. And as I got older, I looked at the people around me, and I did not have words for it at the time, but I saw that people were taking a different approach, and they were actually like getting more of the things that I wanted in my life than I was. And that was like awesome relationships and fun times and a really relaxed, powerful presence when they would walk into a room. And yet, instead of kind of stopping and saying like, what is that thing? I just sort of doubled down on the perfectionism. Like, I just have to work harder. I have to push harder. And it was when I was at the end of college, I signed up for a yoga series. And I'd taken yoga classes before, but I'd never really committed to having a practice. And I remember it so viscerally. I walked into that room and I had this feeling of, this is a place I can take care of myself. I felt, I like to compare it to that children's game of warmer and colder. It was like, this was warmer. And what I've done since then is really spend the rest of my life following that warmer feeling. And that led me to teaching yoga. I taught yoga in the Washington, D.C. area for about 7 years. It led me to leading retreats and recognizing the power of getting people out of their daily lives and really having some time to do that deep reflection on ourselves and how we're living. And finally, it led me to studying Ayurveda. And Ayurveda, it's the sister science of yoga. And so the oldest written texts are Ayurvedic text. It's 7,000-year-old science, which teaches us how to take care of ourselves. It's very revolutionary. And when I started to read it, I recognized that this was what I had been looking for in a lot of ways. I wanted to know how to wake up in the morning. I wanted to know how to exercise my body. I wanted to know what to eat. I wanted to know how to integrate my mind, my emotions, my spiritual life into my body. And so I went for it. At the time, I was living with somebody. I was in my early 30s. I was living with somebody. We'd just gotten a dog together. I was like convinced that this was the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. But as I started taking better care of myself, I started to recognize the space between us, that we did not have the intimacy that I really wanted, that we weren't really able to nurture the kind of habits that I wanted to have for the rest of my life together. And so and I think I was clinging to this relationship so much because I thought I was going to fall apart if we had broken up, which I had done in past relationships. And yet we broke up. And instead of falling apart, I found that the self-care that I was practicing, especially the Ayurvedic self-care, it really held me together. And instead of falling apart, I got so much stronger. And I decided to start my own business. I decided to teach other people self-care. And it was around this time that I got the phone call from my father that he had leukemia. I won't go into too many details about that story, but he had leukemia. We thought he was going to get better, and it was pretty much 8 months of him in and out of hospitals, and finally he passed away at the end. And it was during that time that I think if I didn't have the self-care that I've been practicing for so long, I would have just, drunk a bottle of wine every night and gotten incredibly depressed. And instead, what I did was I woke up in the morning and I did my meditation. I ate the food that I needed to eat, and I showed up and I was able to be with him in his bedside and be present and be loving and really actually heal our relationship in a lot of ways. And it was in that moment that I saw that for so long I had been operating under the understanding that self-care was selfish, that if we really took care of ourselves, it would hurt the people around us. And I saw the opposite in that moment, that it was not only not selfish, but it was actually what put my father at peace. And he told someone close to him in his life at the end of his life that he wasn't going to worry about me because he saw me taking care of myself. And so I recognize what a gift it is that we can take care of ourselves, and we can put the people around us at ease, and we can model for them how to take care of themselves. I find that self-care is extremely generative and profound when practiced authentically, which we'll get into tonight. So before I get into more of a definition of what authentic self-care is, I just want to recognize that we could spend a whole entire week in a workshop together talking about all the facets of authentic self-care and probably not get to the end of them. And we're going to go until 9:15 tonight. So we're going to, just go kind of quick through some big concepts. I invite you to take notes. I invite you to just take the nuggets that really resonate with you and leave the rest behind. This will be recorded, so you can always go back and listen again, but just to trust that even just taking a little of this will go a long way.
And I should also say, as a spoiler, I am so inspired by Gracie and the work that she has done in her life and the work that she has inspired me to do in mine. And the fact that we have so many people, young stage managers, experienced stage managers, and people who love stage managers here, we already see the need. We feel the need. We recognize that this probably needs to continue in some way, and we are thinking about it. So if you have any ideas about what you would like to learn more about after this evening is complete, we'd love to hear from you as well. If, as we're talking, you have any questions about some of the terms that we use, just shoot it in the chat. What did you mean by this? What was that you said? Happy to fill you in, and want to make sure you come away with this with useful ideas and tools. So,
thank you,
Gracie, let's start with this. What is authentic self-care?
I'm so glad you asked, Justin. Because I think what a lot of us get from self-care is a checklist of like, if I do these things, if I drink 8 glasses of water a day, if I, make sure I exercise this amount, if I'm eating lots of leafy green vegetables, I do the self-care thing. And, and I think a lot of us are already putting the thing on the list about like, if I go to therapy, if I like talk about my emotions, things like that. And it's not that none of those things are not self-care. They absolutely are. But rather, I think it's the mindset that is most what defines authentic self-care. And so to talk about that, first, I want to say we have to talk about what self-care is not.
Uh-huh.
So self-care is not, wait for this, it's not self-improvement. And I think a lot of people use those terms interchangeably, and I actually think that they're incredibly different. And this gets to the heart of what we're going to talk a lot about tonight, which is perfectionism. And perfectionism, it is a mindset that tells us that if we are not getting what we want out of life, as I felt, we just need to work harder, be stronger, minimize weakness, and we will get there.
I just started sweating, actually, just hearing you say it.
I'm like a recovering perfectionist. Like, it always comes up. We don't get over this. But at the root of it, what it tells us is that there's something we need to change about ourselves. And I think a lot of people come into self-care thinking that if I can just take better care of myself, then maybe I won't be so emotional. Maybe I won't be so sensitive. Maybe I won't, have to take antidepressants. Like, it's this thing of like, I need to fix this thing that's really wrong. But what we've learned, thank you, Brene Brown, who's a shame researcher, is that that's shame. And that's something we learn really early on as a nervous system defense that tells us that something is wrong with us. And that's not self-care. And what I found is actually the absolute like reverse of that, that if we take care of ourselves radically, exactly as we are as imperfect beings, then we find that we actually don't really want to fix anything about ourselves. And that those places we were trying to cover and hide and fix, that those are actually our places of genius. But we need to nurture them. We need to care for them. We need to create boundaries around them. So self-care, not self-improvement. It's also not this idea of work-life balance. So
Okay.
I think work-life balance is something that we've been taught. And work-life balance is the idea that you can take all of your work and put it into this compartment, and then all of our selves and our other personal lives and put them into this compartment. And if that worked, that would be great, but it doesn't work because inevitably, like the work stuff, you're stressed, you come home at night, you can't stop thinking about that problem, or it's tech week and you don't even have a life, or you're having, your parent is sick, you're breaking up with somebody and you can't quite be as enthusiastic as you want to be. And I think a lot of us punish ourselves for doing that, for not being able to put these things in tidy compartments.
I mean, that's what we do, actually. We are professional, tidy compartmentalizer box people. Stage managers love to have organization. And I think we do a fair amount of feelings and personal needs into certain boxes as well.
And it's great. And I always say with self-care, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. So if you know how to box things off and it's not a problem, then that's great. It works. But if you feel like you can't do that, then I want to trade in the term work-life integration. And what that means is that who you are as a human being, the struggles that you go through in your personal life, the triumphs you go through in your personal life, that adds an incredible layer to who you are as a stage manager. And the same thing, that the kind of professional boundaries that you can set, the depth that you can go to with your cast, that's going to show up in how you parent and how you show up with your partners and how you approach your hobbies as well. And so I think we've been taught a lot in kind of our consumerist society that we should be able just to put ourselves into little boxes. And what we are striving for in authentic self-care is wholeness, that we want to be whole human beings. We want to know how to work with all the parts of ourselves effectively. And I think that's what the real self is who knows how to integrate all of that together.
I love that. I think we might end up having some questions about that later on, because that is, for me, it's hard to wrap my brain around the difference between work-life balance and work-life integration. And I want that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the most important thing is just not to feel bad about it. I work with people who work at nonprofits with really challenging situations where they're helping people and they feel bad that they can't turn off the really tragic situation of their day. And it's like, no, honey, that's part of your life. And so how you take care of yourself in that.
Thank you for that.
So something else that I think is important to recognize in authentic self-care is that a lot of us have been taught that if we were just personally better at self-care, like the world would be a better place. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that we are living in a really toxic system. This is this consumerist society, which, furthers white supremacy, founded on white supremacy, furthers white supremacy, that tells us that if we just work harder, perfectionism, that we can make something of ourselves. And if we're struggling, it's because it's a personal deficit. I teach workshops and I go around the table and every person says, I have anxiety, I have depression. And I'm like, if we look around at everyone and say, is it because we're all so broken as people? Or is it because the actual system is broken? And it's incredibly hard to be a human being who has a fulfilling life within this system. So I know Lisa and Narda fully address this in their article, and they reference this handout, which we're going to put in the chat, which is the characteristics of white supremacy culture.
Oh, yeah.
And those are hyper-individualism, perfectionism, lack of feelings, hyper-rationality, all the things that I think we struggle with in ourselves. And so I just really want to put it out there that you're not broken, but the system is broken. And the only way to fix the system is to really understand that and to start to find the wholeness within ourselves that is perfectly intact there. But we have to peel back all these layers of perfectionism, codependency, trauma. It's absolutely a journey. It's not a destination. When somebody says, I'm not good at self-care, that's immediately where I go. I'm like, you're on a journey. Like, you're learning something. I had to spend years looking at people who are practicing self-care and be totally puzzled by what that was before I could even have a name for it. And that was my journey. So I really want to just encourage everyone out there to see themselves on a journey. And the last thing I will say about authentic self-care is that, when we talk about what it means to be anti-racist and what it means to do anti-racist work and what it means to create a culture of anti-racism, I liken it to a bunch of first graders who are showing up at school and they're given these incredibly hard spelling words on their first day. And they're looking at them and they start to recognize that they don't know the alphabet yet. They don't even know how to spell a word. And so when we start to talk about the nuances of identity and race and privilege and know how to regulate our own emotions when we're feeling like we made a horrible mistake or we're feeling triggered in a moment, that's really advanced stuff. And I think what self-care does is I like to look at it like the ABCs of before anti-racism work, that we learn how to self-regulate. We learn how to understand what our emotions are telling us. We learn how to care for ourselves when we feel like we've totally messed up. Those are the things that we need to have resilience in anti-racism work. So I think that we all need to be out there doing explicit anti-racism work. But if you feel like you can't quite get there, it might be because you need a self-care practice to help you have that alphabet to spell those more complicated words.
I mean, it has been such a challenging 10 months in this country's history that we've all been living through. And so many people have been helping the community, the society make their way through the mud that is the truth and not the truth and people's feelings. And what you just said in like 3 minutes sums up so much for me, gives me so much clarity around where I am in my process for me. So I just want to thank you so much for making that so succinct and clear. I'm very grateful to you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Well, we're in some mucky times right now. I think about the lotus in the mud. Like I really hold a lot of hope for the lotus, and I think that recognizing that we're in the muck is a really important first step to starting to recognize the potential that's within this time. So the more of us that can start to have this conversation, I think it really can lead to some really beautiful things. So are we ready to dive in? Shall we talk about the layers of it? Great. Okay. So again, we can talk about this in a lot of different ways, week-long workshop, but for tonight, we're going to talk about 3 layers of self-care. And I think if you can attend to these 3 layers of self-care imperfectly, but with big heart, I really believe that you will feel like you're on your self-care journey and you will get so much. I like to look at it as a really generative journey. It will take you to where you need to go.
Ready.
And help you learn so much about yourself. Get those thumbs up.
Uh-huh.
So the first layer of self-care is what I like to call outer self-care. And outer self-care is really easily understood in this culture. When we talk about outer self-care, it's exercise, it's sleep, it's what you put into your body, how your digestion is, how your home space is, how you put yourself out in the world. When you look at people, you can have a sense of what their outer self-care is like. And when you can look at yourself, you can have a sense of what your outer self-care is like. If we really want to look at how to feel effective in our self-care, we have to look at perfectionism. And perfectionism, as we mentioned before, it is this concept that we just need to try harder and we could eventually get to a place where we are perfect. I think there are 2 kinds of perfectionists out there. And I'm going to guess that most of you all fall into category A, which is that overachievers. You're going to compartmentalize it. You're going to organize it. You're going to be there 5 minutes early. I couldn't believe how prompt everyone was to the workshop tonight. I really identify as a type A perfectionist. I'm going to overdo it because I don't want to feel like I'm going to do something wrong. I don't want to leave myself open to criticism. I don't want to leave somebody hanging. I don't want to feel like I've been irresponsible. But there's a second kind of perfectionist too. And these are the procrastinators. And procrastinators don't look like perfectionists, but they are. Because what procrastinators are is they're people who are waiting for the perfect time to do something. They're waiting to be in the perfect space in their life to do something, for the time to be perfect, for them to have all the skills that they want to have. And so they never actually do it. But it's perfectionism that motivates that mindset as well. It's just feel free to put it in the chat box if you identify. I mean, I think you're never one or the other. I have parts of me that really procrastinate too. It just depends on what it is.
I
What are
have to
you?
pause you because this is Gracie's book, by the way, everyone. This is called Self-Carefully. And it came out last year, a year and a half ago.
Mhm.
And it is absolutely gorgeous. And she has a series of essays that are so artfully done. And one of them is on perfectionism. And I have flagged a few things. One of them is about this perfectionism procrastination thing. I just want to read because it's kind of what you said, but just helpful for those of us that fall into that category. I procrastinate because I'm waiting for the perfect time to begin. Because that time never comes, I wait and wait. And then I get angry at myself for not following through. Seeing my procrastination as perfectionism softens me, helping me to address the real underlying issue. I'm not lazy, I'm scared of getting it wrong. Usually this kind of self-compassion motivates me to actually get up going on a project or a task. I can't wait for the moment where I am berating myself in my head for being lazy and I'm able to recognize that for what it actually is.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, thanks for reading that. I needed to hear that tonight. And that's the problem. It's not a problem what we do or don't do. It's the problem, the storyline we tell ourselves about it. And this is where identity comes into it. So if you have an identity that you're a lazy person that doesn't ever achieve anything, it can be very hard to break through that. And a lot of times, if you didn't have like a school career where you felt like you were supported by teachers, like you can have that mindset if you didn't learn in that system very well. And so it is about like getting to the bottom of it and really understanding where it comes from. And then finding the way that you work. And all of us work differently of how we motivate ourselves. So I'm going to share one way that I have found to really work with my perfectionism. And it is a practice called Kaizen. And Kaizen, it's a Japanese word. And it translates to mean small change, good change. This is my favorite, continuous change. It's a business practice. So it's used in factories. The idea that like everyone's always looking for the smallest possible tweak you can make to make things more efficient, to make things, to grow in some way. It's built huge companies. And I like to teach it in our self-care because a lot of what perfectionism teaches for how to work with our habits or change our habits or create habits is the willpower method. And the willpower method is the New Year's resolution method. So that is, I will wake up on January 1st and I will be a whole new person. And this comes after the holidays of like overspending, overextending ourselves. And then we feel like at the end of it all, we're going to wake up, we're going to have all the energy that we need to be able to make a huge change in our life, go to the gym every day. And then when we do peter out in it, because willpower is this very exhaustible resource within ourselves, it's not meant to create habit change. It's meant to get us through very difficult situations for a short amount of time. That again, we feel like we're not good at changing our habits. We're not capable of change.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wonder in like stage management, if you feel like at the end of a show, you're going to be able to like create new changes, like when the show's over. Yeah.
Yeah, we have this, it's kind of unfortunate and also kind of beautiful that our routine is this cyclical lifestyle of, for those of us that freelance, and most of us I think are freelancers, although it is awesome when you get that golden job that is something like a regional theater or some like long running show. But truly we are in pre-production and then rehearsal and then tech and then performances, and then we have this space where we don't know if we're going to be going right into rehearsal or we're going to be lingering for a long time before we get back into pre-production. So every time we hit that cycle, that bottom of this circle, it's an opportunity to say, what have I done with my life? Do I really want to stage manage still? I miss it. I love it. I need more. Who am I if I'm not stage managing? I need to find a job. There's this, it's a really interesting thing that happens. And I find that over the 20 years I've been doing it, that I've gotten better at it. So it's maybe less this and more like this, like I'm getting a little better, maybe. Less panic and desperation and depression, but always a question of like, maybe this job will be the one where I fix my problem with how I handle scheduling or blocking, or maybe I can create a better routine around cooking for myself. And it does feel like that New Year's Eve kind of like restart, like this time it's going to be different. And we also work with different stage managers as PAs and assistant stage managers and PSMs. We're always with different teams of people. So you start a new project with a whole new group and you are your best self. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a reinventing of yourself every time. And it offers us this opportunity to reconsider how we want to commit to our routines.
It's a beautiful thing to start to think about it in cycles. I thank you for bringing that in. And it's something that Ayurveda has really taught me, that Ayurveda teaches that we're not separate from nature as human beings. Which, if you think about it, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that as human beings, we would somehow have like figured out how to pull ourselves away from nature. But the same cycles that happen in nature, they're happening in us all the time. And they can happen throughout the year, but I think they happen within work cycles too. And so there is, I'm sure, like a winter that happens at the end of every cycle, which if you look at what's happening in winter in nature is like people are resting, like animals are resting. And I know it can be so hard, especially when financial concerns are there, to just let yourself rest. But what I have discovered is that an overstimulated nervous system rarely makes great decisions.
Fair. Scene.
Yes, that it's anxiety breeds anxiety. And so it is, even if it's just a day or two that you give yourself to be like, and a recognition to be like, I just did a big thing. That was a lot. I need to rest. I need to reset. And then from there, I can start to think about these little habits. I can start to think about how I want to create myself anew. And so Kaizen habits are like, I like to call them like stupidly simple. The one that is the classic is, where do you plug your phone in at night? And can you move it further away from your bed, like the next room perhaps? But you think about how long does it take to make that habit happen? Probably 30 seconds, a minute. And yet what kind of changes does that yield for you? It's like a lot harder to look at your phone before you go to bed at night. It's a lot less tempting to look at it and scroll first thing in the morning. You're going to give yourself a little bit more space on both ends. And that's a huge change. If you give yourself a little more sleep every night, that adds up to a lot of sleep. If you want to wake up earlier in the morning, it's not trying to get up 2 hours earlier. It's trying to like get up 15 minutes earlier, 5 minutes earlier. But what you want to do for yourself is to create momentum, to create a feeling of like, I am in change, like I'm actually making this happen. And so the philosophy on a Kaizen move is that if you try it and it doesn't work, it was too hard. Like you need to try something smaller to make it happen.
That. Oh, I love that.
I use it in everything. I use it like, it's really, I'm parenting 2 young, vibrant children right now who just tear my house apart all the time. And I'm like in a little Kaizen like vacuuming practice where I'm like, we will vacuum for 5 minutes to get this up. And, and it's just like building in a habit. We're going to talk for a moment about routines and rituals too. But I wanted to just pause and see if you had anything you wanted to say about that.
No, I mean, I absolutely love Kaizen. And I will say, it's really rewarding for me to be coming to this material fresh after taking your Self-Care 101 course 6 years ago, which I'm sure several people in this webinar actually know. Maddie DiCarlo, who's a dear friend of mine and another Broadway stage manager, but he and I convinced you to teach us Self-Care 101, even though you pretty much mainly work with groups of women and you really don't work or have not worked yet with people who have completely non-traditional schedules. So we asked that you kind of change your programming to help us and give us some guidance and teach us Ayurveda. And you did such an incredible job. And one of the things that you taught me that has stuck with me is the concept of Kaizen. And one of the symptoms of anxiety in my life that I was able to address bit by bit was moving my phone. That was a big one for me. And it's a small idea, but it has big repercussions. And I recognize that sometimes I take my phone into the bedroom and I plug it in there, or I don't plug it in and suffer the consequences the next day because I don't have a charger in the bedroom anymore on purpose. And that is because the charger slowly moved away and then it had a place that lived elsewhere. And it's really helpful for me. And there's many other things like this, but as I'm coming to the material another time with new eyes, I'm seeing that there's more that I want to do with this material and more things I'd like to implement in my life. So
that's the continuous change. It's
Yeah.
the idea
Yeah.
that you're not done. You don't get somewhere and you're done. It's not like checklist, 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 which I
Right.
know is hard for people who live with checklists, but rather it's like,
Yeah.
no, learning, journey, cycles. Like, okay, phone is back in the bedroom again. Interesting. What's going on? Like, how do we get it back out of that? Is it working for me this time? For me, going, from being single to partnered and motherhood, I've had so many habits just change and flow, go back and forth. And I didn't drink coffee for so long. And then I started drinking coffee in new motherhood again. And it's great. I love a cup of coffee in the morning, whereas before it was overstimulating for me. So it's just this recognition that we're changing, our habits are changing. And so something like Kaizen, it just helps us check in with ourselves, and it helps us recognize that when something is a problem, when it is draining our energy, that we can shift it in a way.
And I would think that for me, the biggest thing that this challenges is my instincts to call something good or bad. Like, I have discovered that is not good for me. And so I'm going to move my phone further away from me so that it's better. And then, so when I brought the phone back to me because I'm nervous about something happening the next day and I want to play with my phone in bed, that's bad. And in the morning, I end up punishing myself. That kind of like punitive thinking, that like binary, black, white, good, bad, right, wrong thing, I feel like that comes up for me with this work.
Absolutely. Because that's perfectionism. That's this idea that we need to be good. And this gets indoctrinated in us as children. Like it's very hard to see outside of it. And yet I think it's how we mature and grow up as human beings, as individuals, is to recognize like, no, I'm going to parent myself. And I can try it out. Like, can I be on my phone? Is it a problem? I don't know. I'll try it out. It is. Okay. How do I work with this in myself? And so that's why it's the habit, but it's so much deeper than the habit. It's really about your feeling of agency to create change. Because if you can create change in one part of life, you can create change in any part of your life, but you have to believe that about yourself. And what I found is that Kaizen, what it does is it deprograms the self-improvement, perfectionist operating system that has been installed in us, almost all of us, without any kind of consent. And then it starts to give us space to be like, what do I want to download? I like to look at like a healthcare system. Spacious, kind, caring, fun, experimental. Like, I think that, people who are attracted to the theater, especially, like, you all want to be living vibrant lives. And yet perfectionism, what it does is it narrows binary, as you said. And so this is a way to start to create more space inside of ourselves. And so that's why I say it's not about the habits, but it's not about the habits either, because that's what it is once we start to do it and be like, well, how does it make me feel? Like, if going to bed earlier when you can probably makes you feel good to get sleep. Eating something that you cook yourself when you have time to do it probably does make you feel good. And so I wanted to move to the part where, a lot of what I teach about Ayurveda is you teach daily routines that are aligned to nature. So waking up early in the morning, going to bed earlier at night. It's hard for you all in your schedule. And yet what Justin has really identified is that routines maybe aren't going to work in that way, of daily routines, but what can work are this idea of rhythms, that you have a rhythm to your day. And even if that rhythm is that you are like up like a rocket out of bed, like, that you have to do that in the morning. And maybe you slow down for 30 seconds while you're brushing your teeth and just say hi in the mirror, like, how are you doing? And maybe your rhythm is that you don't have work and you have a lot of anxiety about that. And that you have a lot of anxiety in between jobs. And so you're like, all right, what's the rhythm? Anxiety, that's coming up right now. What do I need? Do I need like more time in nature? Do I need to like call my therapist again? And so it's starting to recognize that even if it's not going to look perfect, but that you have a rhythm to the way the show runs, to the way that you move through. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the component parts of stage management. You've taught me a lot about this, but that you can create habits and rhythms within that can be really like caring for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, once you get past that like hard shell of perfectionism and you go to the next layer, which is, what do I actually need? Like, what are the things that make me feel like a full, whole, happy, healthy human being in the rehearsal process? I feel like for me, what I learned is getting quality sleep is very important to me. And learning how to have better sleep hygiene was a huge part of my self-care 101 journey. But then I found it really challenging when that started changing for me. Like, it was easy to get 8 hours of sleep when I had no job. And then it was more challenging to do that during rehearsal. And then I was during tech, like very, very pressed to get any sleep that was worthwhile. And I think I accepted that it was okay for those tech days for me to get a little bit less sleep and use the few hours of the morning to care for myself. That actually there was still time to do self-care that was going to get me through the week. And that rhythm was just different for that amount of time. And I didn't have to beat myself up for feeling more tired because I was working harder and I wasn't getting the sleep. It was more like I was doing experiments on myself, actually, after we started, talking about this. I was like, okay, so what routine, which is going to change, it's not like my everyday routine, but what routine helps me? And so I found, really for me, it was checking on my sleep hours and my quality of sleep and getting a great morning routine, so that no matter which rhythm of my life I was in, whatever phase of production we were in, I was still able to make time in the morning to do a few things that made me happy. Like I have a list that's from 6 years ago that is yellowing on the edges a little bit, but is fabulous. Like the first thing I do when I wake up is I go to the bathroom and I also brush my teeth and I splash water on my face and then I sit down. I don't do it every day. I want to do it every day. But when I'm in a routine, especially when it's high stress and there's a lot of work, I really do commit to more of a morning routine that helps sustain me for the rest of the day. And there are many other things, and I wouldn't mind telling my morning routine later on if we have time for it. But that rhythm changes when it happens every day. And I thought that was not okay when we first started talking, that like Ayurveda says you wake up with the sun, you go to bed with the sun, you eat at certain times of the day. And I was like, I could never do that. I can't do that. My schedule is too demanding. And then I realized, well, I can do it. It just shifts depending on the kind of, like you said, season of my job.
Yes, yes. And people who study Ayurveda, they come away with a lot of rules, but I really don't believe Ayurveda is about rules. I think Ayurveda is around awareness. Just like you said, experiments, paying attention to yourself and finding it. But the morning is powerful. I'll say that for everyone there, that I have 2 kids under the age of 4. They wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm lucky if I get 5 minutes to myself before I go in. I'm still nursing my youngest. But that 5 minutes, I make it count. I do things for myself, and I've learned to sequence in, like before I take a shower now, I'm like doing my dry brushing and just looking at like 30 seconds. I will take 30 seconds. Thank you. But we have to move to the next layer, because we have to talk about the thing that gets in the way of us being able to pay attention to ourselves.
Yes.
So we're going to move on, even though we can talk a lot more about this.
Well, before we do, can I just say, while we're still in the outer layer, to drop into the chat, let's share with each other what habits and rhythms have helped us find self-care within our lifestyle. So even though we're all here to learn, I'm sure some of us have learned many things already. So if there are things that work for you in the outer layer, habits and routines, please share them with everyone while we continue on. Thank you.
I've already seen some lovely ones pop up in the chat, so thanks for sharing those.
Great.
Okay, so we have to talk about the second layer of self-care, which is the inner layer.
We knew that was coming. Yeah.
That you can live your whole life without tending to it, and a lot of people do. You have no idea what's going on with somebody's inner layer when you look at them. Sometimes you can tell, but a lot of times people have this outer layer like aced, and yet they're really lost and suffering on the inside. I think the most like type A perfectionists are this way. A lot of fear and disconnection and loneliness on the inside. And so what the inner layer is, it's about really checking in with yourself and knowing how you're feeling, understanding what your emotions are about, really embracing the power of vulnerability within your life, which we'll talk about. So the first thing we have to talk about when we talk about this inner layer is what gets in the way of us recognizing it. And that is the distinction I like to make between self-care and something called numbing. And numbing is like, I know everyone feels really called out when I talk about this, but we need to talk about it because it does get in the way. So numbing is like pseudo self-care. Numbing is, I've had a really hard day. I'm going to come home. I'm going to drink 3 glasses of wine and watch 4 episodes of the show So it's binge watching and it's drinking and it's eating in a way that you're doing it to like kind of because you don't know what else to do in that moment. You're feeling bored, you're feeling tired.
Does
Social
a
media.
does a jar of peanut butter and a box of crackers count?
You
Like
know,
an entire
if you're
jar?
so hungry and that is like just doing it for you, then yeah. But my sense, you can feel it in the way that it happens. And I always like
You
to say
know it's numbing. Yeah.
the difference between numbing and self-care is that when you wake up the next morning, you feel if you've done self-care, you feel like good about it. Like, and if you wake up, you don't really feel good about the numbing. Like you don't feel good about like the Netflix or the like 2 hours you spend on Facebook or
Right.
yeah, we can
We
numb.
know. We know it. We know what it is. Yeah.
You kind of have, it's like a little bit of that like grimy feeling or something like, and what numbing is
Guilty
it
pleasure. It's kind of like what we call guilty pleasures. There is a lot of guilt around these kind of numbing behaviors, I think.
oh yeah. And I'm seeing, yeah, Laura's saying in the chat that numbing is what you've done in the past year. And at first I want to say that there's nothing wrong with numbing.
Thank you.
That numbing is what it is it's us taking really challenging emotions that we don't know how to deal with in the moment, usually because we're exhausted, and turning down the volume on those because we can't deal with that.
Oh, I love that. Yes, I know that has been this year.
Yes. Yeah. And I think this year we've all needed to numb. We're just like, I have to turn the volume down on this. And so the only way it becomes a problem is when you start to confuse numbing with self-care. And a lot of people do this to think like my self-care is like my time when I like drink my wine and watch my show, or this is my time. And there's nothing wrong with drinking a glass of wine. There's nothing wrong with watching TV. I do those things sometimes. And yet it's like the attitude with we do them, because the problem is if you're constantly turning the volume down on your life, then you never fix anything from the root. So if you feel overwhelmed all the time, and you don't make any changes, which is what self-care is that you actually have to make some changes and you have to address some of these things at the root. And especially working on this inner layer of self-care takes a lot of work. And but if you're always turning the volume down and numbing, like you don't even know how you're feeling a lot of the time. So if you want to get curious about how things make you feel, what you want, how your feelings are, like it is starting to track your numbing and to understand. Like for myself, like I notice that when I'm overwhelmed, I want to numb more. And it's like, that's like, I need to like look at my scheduling of like, how do I create more space in my schedule? How do I, negotiate with my partner to like have more time to myself away from the kids? Like things like that, which are hard conversations to have or hard things to do because I have to disappoint people. I have to kind of like set boundaries. And yet, and if I can't do that, then I just kind of miss the experience of being myself. So
Yeah.
numbing, you need to know about numbing.
Yeah, that's a pretty big obstacle. I see that.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about like this moment in time, which is so great, is that like everyone's in therapy. I think 50 million people tried therapy for the first time this year.
Wow.
That figure, like people are starting to recognize that they need to do this work. And if there is a blessing of this pandemic year, it is that I think it's made people have to really pay attention to themselves in a way that when, I numb through over scheduling and being busy and never having to like slow down.
Guilty.
Yeah. So it's like having to slow down a little bit. And then what do we find inside? And I think, what that inner layer of self-care is about is one, it's about vulnerability and seeing the work of Brene Brown. If you have not watched her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability, it's really important because I think what perfectionism is that we're trying to minimize feeling vulnerable. Because vulnerability, when we feel it, like we feel like we've made a mistake, when we feel like we made someone angry, when we feel like we're just not sure what we're doing with our lives, that period between shows, like there's a lot of vulnerability in that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
reevaluating everything. And so we've been conditioned to like, stop it. Like, I can't let anyone see me go through this. I can't let myself feel this. And yet what Brene Brown has, showed us is that you can't have connection in your life if you don't have vulnerability in your relationships. You can't I don't think you can really have like a caring relationship with yourself unless you can recognize what vulnerability feels like and treat it as a practice to be like, oh, I don't like this. And I've been in this vulnerability practice for a while. I don't like how it feels when it comes up. I feel messy and scared. And yet I don't think I would be able to like be in my marriage right now if I didn't have a conscious practice of vulnerability, because it creates connection. It creates
Right.
it's compassion. It's really important. And, especially with the work that you all do, is that you are holding so much space for others right now. And so if you're, someone in your cast were to come to you and be like, I'm having a really hard day and I feel messy, you would, as stage managers, you'd be like, tell me, oh no, yeah, you're great. You reassure. And yet I feel like we have a hard time doing that for ourselves sometimes, of recognizing that we're allowed to have a hard moments, especially when you're used to being in control a lot and having, you being the one who has things together.
That is, I feel seen. That's validating to hear you say.
Yeah. And I think, and what Brene Brown teaches us about vulnerability is that we have to share it with people who've earned the right to hear it from us. So that isn't like going into a show and being like, I'm feeling messy, everybody.
I'm vulnerable. Everybody hears my issue. Right.
It's oversharing, and that actually is a way to kind of block vulnerability. And so it is about, having some confidence in your life, people who get you, who, like, I think you and I have been able to do that for each other, people who understand that it's a sign of strength that you're being vulnerable, recognizing it in yourself. Like, even just having that word vulnerable is helpful in that moment, to be like, I'm feeling vulnerable right now. How do I take care of myself? Do I need a walk?
Right.
And then the other thing I wanted to say too is just emotional intelligence, is that we have a lot of emotions as human beings. We've been taught in culture that we, like, the happy, good feelings are the ones that we want to pull up. And then, like, the sad, angry feelings we push down. And what that does is it just cuts parts of ourselves off. And so when I look at what is emotional intelligence, it's about giving ourselves space to be whole, like understanding everything that we're feeling, recognizing anger in ourselves, not seeing it as a bad thing. It's not that we need to act on anger every time we feel it, but recognizing this emotion actually has intelligence to it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about boundaries in the next section and setting them. I don't think we can have a boundary setting practice until we can recognize what anger feels like in our bodies and our minds. So, but until you kind of work on numbing and vulnerability, I think that the next step is like starting to pay attention to what emotions you're feeling and see how much intelligence they actually have in them. And this is a lifelong practice. I really highly recommend getting a therapist. If you've never done any of this work before, like, don't do it alone. Like, you're going to need people to probably hold some space for you.
Right. Because emotional intelligence is observing and understanding your feelings. And that's not something that we're all trained to do. It's actually a skill. Emotional intelligence is something that's learned. You're not born emotionally intelligent. You're actually taught that, and you learn how to do it. You learn it through culture, and you learn it through society, and you learn it from people who know what they're doing. And you can cultivate it in yourself, but ultimately it's something that you can increase and grow your capacity for. And I think we don't value that skill in our American capitalist culture as much as I think we could. And so it begins with us learning to value that for ourselves.
Yeah. And my sense is that people in your community, you actually have a lot of emotional intelligence. Like, to be able to
know how to read a room. I mean, truly, we're stage managers are such an interesting breed of human, because we are artists and we are facilitators. And we are people that hold space, and we're mediators, and we are visionaries in our own right. We're creative beings, and yet we serve a purpose in the artistic community to be holding that space and facilitating. So amongst the artists, we seem like we're the people that hold it all together, but in a group of people that are doctors, lawyers, teachers, and politicians, we're the artistic ones in those circles. Do you know what I mean? Like, we bridge a lot of different types of careers. And we always kind of pride ourselves on saying, with stage management skills, you can do anything. But the truth of the matter is, one of those things that makes us able to do anything is our ability to walk into a room and read other people and read what is needed in our space. I think that part of that key skill is emotional intelligence.
So much. And so I'm going to ask you all to do this like revolutionary thing, that the grace that you give to others out there around emotional intelligence and the honing in, like, just to like give it to yourself. too. Turn it back to yourself, because it can be really easy to do that for everybody else. And so it's like you have the skill set, so it's just about making sure that you're applying that to yourself as well. And the grace that you give to people around you who make mistakes and are in vulnerable moments, like you give that to yourself.
Well, that's the thing that really blew my mind about Lisa and Narda and their incredible article from earlier, and in their book as well. They really are very forward about what it is to create a space where mistakes are okay. It's a form of dismantling perfectionism, but actually saying like, I'm going to be learning how to tech this show for the first time. I'm actually saying that to the director, or saying that to the designers, or saying that to the crew, and saying like, I may make mistakes. This is going to be hard for me. That is not something that's easy to do, but man, that sets you up right from the jump as being vulnerable and willing, and it sets you up to have grace for yourself. And it lets other people, it gives permission to other people to see you as human, because we're humans and we make mistakes, and that's okay.
And so much of what you all are doing is you're setting a tone, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if you can set that tone that we're learning from mistakes here. Like that's the tone. Like we celebrate our mistakes because they're going to help us get better. Like then they give so much grace for people who don't have the same kind of like way to hold a space,
Right.
especially people who are in communities where they are not traditionally given space.
Totally.
In the BIPOC community, to be able to say like, this is what, especially if you are in a body that passes as white, like it's really important to be doing that and be embracing vulnerability and like practicing vulnerability and mistakes in public. It's very important. So but it's hard. And I think it's just important to keep always tracking how hard it is. So
move on to the third layer.
I think so, but I also want to just, in the chat box, I'd love to hear any way that you have learned to take care of this inner layer of self-care for yourself. And if there are any resources, talks, books, anything like that, it's a great resource to be able to share with everybody. But yeah, we have to get to the last layer because it's important. I think it's the one that I think is the best opportunity for a community to embrace this together, because the actual last layer is the community layer. And when I started doing the work of teaching people about self-care, I had no idea that this layer existed. I still thought of it as this individual process that you go through. But I taught groups. I always like to work with groups of people. And I thought it was powerful when people shared their experiences with each other and practice vulnerability. And then I started to see that that the support that people were able to give each other in their growth process, it added up to more than the sum of its parts. The way that we could get when we all committed to growing together in an intentional way, it was just like people made huge changes in their lives in 10 weeks. That was the core self-care 101 I taught for years. People just changed their lives in 10 weeks. And I was like, this is more than just what one person can do. And it made me recognize how important it is that we have support for our growth in our lives. And I think especially in a community like yours, where from what you've explained to me is that you are one person who does stage management, maybe some assistants and other people to help, but that you don't have another stage manager who does the work that you do on your show. So you're kind of like an island who's
That's right. If we're lucky, we have a team of 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, but that team is all doing their own separate duties and responsibilities, and sometimes it's fractured. So there is somewhat of a solo lone wolf vibe, and we don't have a community with each other outside of that silo, that basement that we're working in, or that warehouse, wherever we are. We all kind of work simultaneously and then we go home. There really hasn't been a community. So yeah, Carolyn just put it in the chat, but that's why this year of the stage manager has been, and the incredible kind of convergence of the pandemic simultaneously. We're all at home and we've created a community online, which I'm really looking forward to seeing how that manifests into the third dimension when we are in person at theaters and we're able to actually step out of the theater and know the other stage managers that are working in our streets and our cities. I am looking forward to that.
I I think that everybody needs other people, but I think that you all as stage managers really need each other. From what you've shared with me about what it takes to kind of like have to hold the tension of a whole show, like who is supporting you when you're supporting everybody? And like, you know, we haven't really gotten into people pleasing, which I think is kind of its own workshop. And I think we'll address that a lot more. Justin and I have some plans to offer some follow-up workshops for people who want to go deeper. But that people pleasing, it's a lot to have to like, you know, be there for everybody. And in the moments when you choose to have to set the boundaries and discern and trust yourself, is it okay to push back? Should I just go with it? You need to have a really discerning, supportive group of people who are there for you and your growth.
Mm.
And I think that you all have that here. You have the you know, start of it becoming even much bigger. And so from my outside perspective of just watching groups, I really don't think people can have transformation that's sustainable without having a supportive group to bring them along the way. And a lot of times are people from home or people, you know, I know the community people that I grew up with, I love them so much, but they're not committed to personal growth in the same way that I am. Like they like to like go, they don't go to bars now, but like they will be back at the bars when the pandemic is over. And it was kind of painful for me to recognize that I love them and they're really important to me and they're not like my soul family, you know, that I need people who are on the path and on a journey and like want to be there on the journey and support me through the parts of it. So it's just so important to have support along the way. And and not just for yourself, but in terms of, you know, I have this vision that if enough of us can work on our personal self-care to the point where we are practicing in public and influencing the people around us, that it can create a movement of people. And I think it's already happening. I feel it here. I feel it in so many parts of my life. There's so many other people out there doing this kind of work that there's a momentum that is picking up. And so it's just about all of us doing our part to gather the people who are ready to do this work together. And I think that's how we start to create a change in culture, which I think it really is dismantling white supremacy. So it's deep what it is, and yet it's so personal and small in how we practice it. So, yes.
I mean, clearly all of these things deserve more time and I don't think we've skated over them, but I do want to thank you so much for essentializing all of these ideas so well. I feel like we got a real sense of each of the layers. That was really, really fabulous. Before we do a little Q&A, if you would like to drop into the chat some ideas about this third layer, like how do we as a community, how do we upgrade our culture as stage managers so that we are actually participating in a culture of care? I'm going to pull our Q&A up, and I would like to start with, okay, Barrett asks, are there any books or articles that you would suggest to keep learning about authentic self-care?
Oh man, if you haven't read Brene Brown, she's great.
Gifts of Imperfection, especially.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great primer for a lot of this. She talks about wholehearted people. It's a lot of research. So if you kind of like have a research brain, she's wonderful.
I'm kind of skipping around, but I know you have a great answer for this. Mandy Scott asks, any suggestions of how to practice self-care when you're in an environment or community with a lot of codependency?
Yeah, just Mandy, first, my heart goes out to you. It's hard. It's hard to be around a lot of codependency. It just sucks the energy out of situations. And it's really about people not owning their power. And I think when people don't own their power, I call it kind of like exploding doormat, is that it's a lot of passive aggressiveness. Is people are like, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. And then when you don't tend to yourself, it comes out in these very sideways and often toxic ways. So I think it is, if it's a short-term thing, like when people are in long-term work situations where it doesn't seem like people are going to change, I always encourage them to think about other options, because you can't change people until they're ready to make these changes for themselves.
Right.
Codependency, it covers trauma. And so people are traumatized, and until you're ready to deal with the trauma, like you won't deal with it, like you will act out in other ways. And so I think, you know, just having some names for it, and that's something that I keep coming back to, is vocabulary is so important, to be able to name numbing, to be able to name morning routine, and be able to name codependency. And so I'm so glad you can even name it and see it. And then to look at like, how do you own your power in those moments? And sometimes owning your power is just putting up an energetic bubble of like, do not disturb. And sometimes owning your power is like letting yourself be very affected by the toxicity that you're witnessing, and like calling a good friend, getting on with your therapist, and just like letting yourself see how it's affecting you in that way. But it's always very tricky when we don't have a choice over the kind of the emotional development of the people around us. I think we have a like codependency problem in our nation right now, and maybe in the world. So there's a lot to say about that one. We can go into that in some of the further workshops too.
Just to piggyback on what you said about codependency, M. Miller is asking, like, how do you realize whether you're numbing or applying self-care in your life? Like, how, especially when you're exhausted, how do you know if it's numbing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're exhausted, maybe it's giving yourself some permission not to know that you're numbing. I think like when you're in this world, to be like, I don't even know what's going on right now. Like that, I think that might be the first step of grace. I do think self-care is going to take a little bit more work. Like if you like to get home and like cook yourself dinner and like meditate for a while, like that's going to take some effort. It takes a little bit of energy to do the self-care, but it gives you back energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think when you don't feel like you're like, when you just sort of slump into it, it's probably more of numbing. And sometimes you just need to slump into it because you don't have the energy to even give it anything. And I think the metric of the next morning too, of just like, how do you feel the next morning? Do you feel kind of proud of yourself, or do you feel a little like fuzzy about it? Like that might be, but they can be, it's very like subtle, the difference sometimes.
It speaks to the kind of science project that you become your own science project. You observe for yourself how things feel. And I think when you're numbing, it's harder to feel. Like when you're exhausted and you're numbing, you get into a pattern where you're like, I know what I want, and what I want is ice cream. And, there's no room really to even think about how you feel about that ice cream. And if you do, maybe it is guilt more than anything else. So I sometimes see anger or guilt, anger as like a flag that I'm not respecting my own boundaries, and guilt as a sign that I'm not listening to myself.
Oh, I love that definition of guilt, that you're not listening to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're at time, and there are many other questions here, which we are going to type answers to if you want to stick around. But I want to just say thank you so much, Gracie, for coming and being a part of this and joining our community. I look forward to doing this again with you, maybe a lot. We'll see how that goes. I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been a lot of information and a lot of deep programming that is starting. I would love to know, before you leave, if you could put into the chat what you were inspired by this evening and what you're looking forward to putting into practice. We're really curious to know what got you going. And we are going to be continuing this conversation. Rachel, if you would put up our last slide, there is a QR code, because we live in the future now. And there's also going to be a link in the chat for you all to click to sign up for more information about our upcoming workshops. There you go, it's coming. And it is, we don't know what it will be, but it's going to be awesome. And our websites and social media links are listed here too. We're going to leave the slide up and stay in the chat for a few minutes. But before we go, I just want to say a special thank you to Amanda Spooner for championing our work, and to Rachel Baumann for being the stage manager of this webinar. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and engaging with this work with yourself and with our community. Be well and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody. So much love. Take care of yourselves.